Hello and welcome back to another episode of Finance Agents Live. This is episode number 38, and today we're talking about equipment finance. We have a special guest here, Phil, who we've been working with him on equipment finance for maybe 7 years now, maybe 8 years. I mean, a long time. So done a lot of deals together, and I look forward to you guys getting to learn amazing stuff about equipment finance. So we'll be talking about that soon. Darren, if you could move on, I want to, if you're new to the show, you've never been here before, please subscribe or follow our channel, like me, like the show, whatever you can do. Your likes and subscriptions help us help more people just like you. For next week's show, we're going to be talking about unsecured finance and quick funding personal loans that have really been taken off recently. So if you're interested in hearing about that, go find the show and set a reminder so you get a reminder email when it happens. There's a picture of me being excited about unsecured finance. And you see the arrow shows you exactly where to go. Click that little button and you will get an email. All right, but going back to Phil, I think we had a slide up.
By the way, I love that you're wearing the exact same shirt, and I'm also wearing the exact same shirt today.
It was planned, right?
I swear I have more clothes than this.
Well, I took the pictures today. I always like to try to take live pictures the day of.
Thanks.
You just wear the same shirt today, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with that. It's a good shirt. So this is Phil, and so we were talking before the show about how long have you been doing equipment? We've been working together 7 or 8 years, and you say that's about?
It's about 8, 9 years. If I think back, it's wild how fast it's been, but it's probably 8, 9 years since I started in the business.
Right.
Yeah.
One of the busiest guys I know, so you work hard. How many millions of dollars of equipment leasing do you think you've done over the last 9 years? Pretty impossible to calculate, right?
I couldn't even tell you off the top of my head.
How much do you think you do in a year? Wait, maybe last year.
Maybe total, maybe 75 to 100, maybe 70. Yeah, 75 million maybe.
So maybe about 10 to 20 million a year is what you're...
Yeah, I'd have to go back, but yeah, that makes probably sense.
Okay, all right, a lot. So let's talk about equipment finance. When we say equipment finance, you're often going to hear equipment leases. We have a lot of different names for them. We have a few here on the slide. So why don't you read those off and tell me, are they all accurate? Are there other words that you would use to describe equipment finance or equipment leasing?
Equipment, capital, finance lease, asset-based lending, loan, conditional sales lease, dealer finance, sale, leaseback.
Do you use all those terms? Or
we
some
do.
Of those not? Is asset-based lending considered a way to describe equipment?
It is,
leasing?
but not very often. I mean, there's fair market value type leases. There's tax type leases. But yes, between all these, you've pretty much covered them all.
What's a tax lease? Tax type lease?
Different lease structures that allow for increased tax benefits to the user of that equipment.
Okay.
Or the business owner.
All right, great. So a lot of different names. I think the most common one is leasing. So it's way more frequently a lease than a loan.
Equipment finance, equipment lease, I use those words interchangeably because yes, you can do an equipment finance agreement or equipment lease.
What percentage is a loan versus a lease? I mean, is it 100% lease or is it 50?
What do you mean percentage?
Well, you could issue a loan that has monthly payments fully amortized and you could pay it off early with no prepayment penalty. That's a loan. Or a lease, you pretty much got to pay the whole thing off, even if you, right? I mean, a lease is different than a loan.
Correct. Usually you'll get a discount on a lease to pay it off early, depending on how the lease is structured.
So do you do almost all lease, or do you actually do some loans?
I'd say probably 95% of our transactions are lease transactions.
Okay.
Correct.
All right. Now, I've noticed over the years with the people we work with that the most common misconception is that when they hear equipment finance, they think tractors and trucks, right? Vehicles and heavy machinery. That seems to be what most people expect. And the reality is for businesses, there's a lot of different uses that you can have for equipment finance way beyond just tractors and trucks. So I think we have some examples on the next slide just to give you a little idea, but really it's a lot of stuff. Why don't you give some examples of some of the things that you can finance through equipment leasing that you think people wouldn't think of normally?
Sure. Looking at the pictures there, I imagine if I walk into the one on the right with the kitchen equipment, walking into a restaurant, we can finance under an equipment finance agreement or a lease. We could finance all the kitchen stuff, the hoods, the fryers, the stoves. We can stretch it and finance the point of sale systems, all the security systems, the sound systems, a lot of the HVAC systems in the building we can finance. The signage for the business, a lot of people don't realize, but that signage can oftentimes cost $15,000, $20,000, $30,000.
Wow.
So when you start adding in all that stuff along with the chairs, and I mean, pretty much all of it with the coolers and whatnot.
Yeah.
It makes up a good, I'd say 60 to 70% of the cost of starting a restaurant is all comprised of equipment financing.
How are restaurants, by the way? You know, in some industries, some lending types, they hate restaurants. Some, they love them. How do you guys, how does equipment feel about restaurants?
You know, I don't know any lenders that really love restaurants, to be honest with you.
Merchant cash advance receivables, those companies?
Correct.
They love them.
Correct. Different loan products absolutely love
Right.
restaurants. Kitchen stuff, on average, is very minimal resale value for us. And unfortunately, just industry-wide, the turnover rate or the failure rate for businesses in the food and beverage industry is on the higher side. I want to say it's somewhere upwards of 60 to 70% of a failure rate, which
Really?
makes it for lenders
Wow.
like myself very difficult to underwrite and lend to and collect our money back.
So I have a client right now who is buying into where there used to be a restaurant. All the restaurant equipment is still there. So basically he's just getting in and then he's got to buy the equipment. Can he finance the used equipment through you? And how hard is that? Is that complicated?
It is a little more challenging. The problem is we needed a full inventory of all the assets. If we could get a lot of times an equipment broker that gets involved and handles the transaction as an intermediary, then yes, we can finance that used equipment and we would pay that equipment broker directly. If
Okay.
it's a private party sale, it's very difficult. I don't recommend those type transactions because you got to do lien searches, all this good stuff that
Right.
it's not going to be the best product for them.
So let's say somebody is moving into a new lease. They moved into a new location and the landlord isn't providing tenant improvements. They got to pay for everything themselves. Typically, how much of that could you finance through leasing? So somebody's got to come in, maybe do some paint, construction, buy furniture, buy computers, the whole thing. What percent could you finance and what couldn't?
It depends on if that new business owner is moving into just a vanilla shell or if they're moving into a location that used to be a restaurant. A lot of times you just need to upgrade the equipment and we can finance 100% of that.
Okay.
If they're going into vanilla shell where they have to install all sorts of stuff, paint, lighting, concrete, drywall, all that good stuff, then it increased our soft cost amount. It is tougher to finance that stuff for a startup business. However, if it's a business owner that's been in business a couple of years and opening, let's say, a second store or a third store, then it is a lot easier to finance that soft cost. And oftentimes we can finance all that soft cost within the same equipment finance lease program.
Is there a ratio?
For a startup company, we usually want to keep these soft costs under 20%. Soft cost being the drywall, paint. If you have at least 5 years time in business and start a new location, something like that, in some cases we can stretch it up to 50 to 75% of the actual amount.
Okay. How easy is it to finance furniture? Is that complicated or easy or?
Very easy. It's
Really?
considered just
Okay.
an equipment.
Okay, great. All right, so here's sort of an overview on equipment finance as we understand it. Feel free to disagree with anything you see here, Phil. So funding ranges for what we handle are anywhere from $5,000 to $5 million. Now that's really the ranges. I don't like dealing with stuff under $5,000. It's just a lot of work, right? And if somebody doesn't have the money for something that costs $1,000, it might not be a great person to work with. So we tend to see stuff from 25 to maybe 250,000. That's probably what I see the most. What do you see the most?
Our average ticket right now, I think, is 125,000.
Okay.
However, it's like you said, I'd say 15 to 20,000 is pretty much the floor we want to keep it at, where the return makes sense for everybody to work on the transaction. But we also do go into the millions of dollars transactions.
Okay. So we got $5,000 to $5 million, which Phil will do all your $5 million deals. Just let us know.
Happy to.
There's 100% financing available. Now, when we say 100%, my understanding is you still have to put down first and last. So it's not totally 100%, right?
You know,
And is that still accurate or?
In most cases, we do require a first and last month payment. If the credit is better, it's almost guaranteed we only require one advance payment. And in some cases, we can do 0 advance payments for stronger credit customers.
Okay.
So yes, it can actually be 0% down.
Okay, great. So there's 100% financing available, fixed monthly payments, so they don't fluctuate. That's pretty much all the time. It's fixed payment, right?
Which is great as rates are going up. If you just listen to the news today,
Are they?
it's a good
I
time to
didn't hear
lock
that
it.
yet.
It's a good time to lock in rates.
All right, so it helps you build your business credit, preserves your working capital. This is the number one important thing from my perspective for businesses. I see a lot of businesses, they go buy a bunch of equipment on their credit cards, personal credit cards even worse. Now their personal credit is all maxed out. They don't have any business funding. If they had some, they used it on equipment instead of preserving it for payroll or marketing. So that is, if you're a business owner and you bought a bunch of computers with a credit card, how long do they have for them to come do equipment finance? They could buy it and then still lease it after the fact?
Yes. Typically, I have up to 60 days. So if they pay for something with their credit card, I get proof of payment. Now, I have to do a lien search, which also gets a little more challenging, so it's not preferred method of doing it. But yes, I can go back 60 days to reimburse that person and get it off their credit card.
Okay, great. I think we have an example on the next thing. We have a construction and plumbing firm. This is one that we helped. I'm not sure if you worked on this one specifically, but there were two pieces to, I don't even know what the heck they were. 41 grand was the first one. I think this is I don't remember. 41 grand in the first, 44 and a half. Do you often split up somebody into two separate leases? If somebody is doing a big purchase, do you often split it up into separate leases?
We can. We have the ability to. So if, let's say the customer, may only qualify for $30,000 with us, and maybe we work with an outside source that's interested in taking on additional $30,000 in risk, then yes, we can potentially split up the transaction.
Okay, if somebody's going to get, I think I remember now that they were getting two different trucks. So if they got one truck and then they waited a month and got another truck, would they end up with two leases or would you combine them?
Most likely they'd end up in two different leases. We do have what's called a master lease or a wrap lease where we can include them. Usually those are reserved for higher dollar amount and stronger credit customers. Most of the time they're set up in individual leases, which oftentimes the business owner prefers just for taxes and accounting purposes.
Okay. How long does it take to finance a truck these days? If you're a plumbing firm, it's just a truck to drive around town. Is that fast and easy, or what's
it
that
is?
look
If they're buying from a vendor, something like that can be wrapped up in, I'd say 2 to 5 business days is pretty typical. If it's a private party, you want to add a couple of days to that. It does take a little bit longer for a private party.
Okay, great. All right, so moving on, Darren. All right, current market. So you've been doing this for a long time. You've watched equipment change and grow, modify over the years. So why don't you tell us about the current market? What's going on? How is it changing? What do you see over the next couple of years?
Over the last several years, I've seen the market open up substantially, both with our lending capacity as well as outside lender capacities in terms of what we call app-only products. So products for customers that are an existing business, couple years time business. App-only product means they only submit a credit application and a sales quote and sometimes bank statements. So very minimal credit package and can usually get approved. Back in the day, it used to be $50,000. It's creeped all the way up to $250,000 is what we have available now.
$250 app only.
So a lot of lenders I know are in the $100,000, $150,000 mark, even some are in the $250,000 mark. So that's been a big piece that's helped out a lot. Startup markets opened up a lot. 5-6 years ago, we didn't have many opportunities and options for funding startup companies. But our credit appetites increased, as well as I know a lot of outside lenders have increased their appetite as well, which has really helped out a lot of startup businesses.
Okay, great. Well, good. So let's talk about some of the minimum and ideal criteria we have in order to qualify for equipment financing. Now, I think we have a list that we're going to put up on the screen as soon as, here we go. All right, so when I talk about minimum ideal, a lot of times you go to a lender and say, what do I need to get financing with you? And they tell you the minimum criteria. But what they don't tell you is that if you are near the minimum on some of them, you need to be much higher on the other ones, or it's just not going to happen. A lot of people don't understand that, and then they get frustrated. They say, well, they said I needed a 600, I got a 605. Yeah. Why didn't I get approved? Well, it's because you're a startup with a 605, right? So we have a list of the minimum and ideal criteria. I have here 550 FICO as the minimum FICO. Have you financed anybody with less than a 550?
For a startup, no. With 550, it'd be pretty tough to finance a startup at a 550 unless you had additional collateral, real estate, or something else along those lines. For startup companies, the credit scores have actually started to come up in terms of requirements, just because we've seen some portfolio in terms of need. Just because I think of portfolio issues. I would say around 600 is pretty typical for a startup company. For credit score wise.
What about existing businesses?
Existing businesses, we can get in the 500s because at that point we're not so much looking. We are looking at the personal credit, but a lot more of the weight goes on the business credit reports. So it's like you were saying, if the business credit reports are super strong, but the personal credit reports are very weak, they'll still get approved, and a lot of times they get approved for a great rate. But it also can work.
I don't see that much. My experience, if somebody's personal credit is bad, their business is either brand new, so it hasn't had time to have bad credit, or the business is a little bumpy too. Is that your experience?
Not really. There's a lot of businesses that just don't do financing. And the challenge with that is if they don't do any financing, they have no business credit.
Right.
They may be a strong borrower, but if they have no business credit, I can't prove them on corporate credit. I'd have to look at personal side. But it also can work vice versa. I mean, if the personal side is very strong but they have no business credit, it can hurt them for an existing business. So as they get a couple years time business, we look more heavily on business credit reports, such as a PayNet report or an Equifax business credit report.
Okay. So FICO 550 is the minimum. 650 or better is listed as ideal. So a lot of times they see somebody with a 680 credit score. They have good credit, but they have high debt. So how do you guys look at that? If you look at a business owner who seems to be maxed out on all his credit cards, how negatively does that impact your decision to give them an equipment lease?
Very significantly. For a startup company, we are going to be a little more risk adverse. We're going to want to see that revolving credit a little bit lower to know that they're a little bit less of a risk. But along with that, we're going to want to see other big things such as comparable credit. That's a big thing we like to see. Somebody may have a 650 credit score, but if their highest trade is a $12,000 auto, they're not going to get approved for a $50,000 equipment lease. We're going to want to see some comparable trades, and that's a big component.
Okay, great. All right, so for time in business, we can do startups, but everything's going to be harder for a startup. Ideally, they have at least 24 months in business. And when we say 24, do we really mean you want to see 2 years tax returns, which means they're probably more like 30 months? Or is it really 24 months, maybe just 1 year's business tax returns?
Oftentimes, depending on the dollar amount, oftentimes we don't need any tax returns.
Okay.
And it also goes back to the business reports. If there's business credit there and they've established credit as an early business, then it can substantially help them without asking for tax returns. Now, if they have no business credit, then yes, we may want to ask more about the tax returns or the financial well-being of the company.
Okay, but if somebody has 2 years in business, that pretty much checks all the box for business requirements, as long as they have all the other stuff, good PayNet and all that.
Correct.
PayNet or Paydex? I know Paydex. What's PayNet?
Yeah, Paydex is a score used by DMB.
DMB. Yeah.
PayNet is a totally different reporting system, which is probably one of the most accurate reporting systems for the equipment lease space.
Okay, all right. So you can have a bankruptcy if it's been discharged. That's fine?
Correct.
How many years ago do you want to see?
At least 2 years, and you have to see a reestablished credit. So if they filed bankruptcy and it's discharged, not filed, but discharged, means it's closed and done, we're going to want to see since that bankruptcy that they've reestablished credit, they've taken on new credit, they've paid that credit on time. That's going to give us what we need to help get that customer approved. If they filed bankruptcy and it's discharged 2 years ago, and since 2 years they've been too afraid to take any financing, they didn't do any financing, we're not going to be able to help that customer because all the trade lines that happened prior to the bankruptcy, we literally don't consider them whatsoever.
All right, so if you had a bankruptcy, go get a bunch of credit right away.
Pay it on time, be responsible, that's all.
So judgments and liens are okay if they're in a payment plan? Are there any exceptions to that? It's like a tax lien, fine? Or what?
Depends on the size of the tax lien. It depends on the size of the request. If a borrower is only asking for $20,000, $30,000, he's got a couple $1,000 tax lien on a payment plan, we can work with that.
Okay.
If he has a $500,000 tax lien and he's on a payment plan, or maybe not on a payment plan, it's going to be a lot more concerning for us.
Not going to help. All right. Can you use, if you don't have qualifying credit, can you bring in a credit partner, like bring in a co-signer? Does that work?
You can, absolutely, and it does help. That co-signer we like to see is hopefully involved in the business. That makes it more advantageous for them. Not somebody where the business is in California, but they co-sign with their mom that's in Tennessee.
You don't want moms on?
Yeah, it just doesn't give us that much warm and fuzzies knowing that person's so far away. We would like to know that they're close by and help out with the business. But yes,
so if mom's close, it's okay. If mom's in Tennessee, forget it.
Right.
How about moms in Miami-Dade County? Do you guys still have the prohibition on Miami-Dade?
We don't. As the markets have opened up,
Miami is back.
It is back. It's definitely one of those things when you see it, it raises a red flag, like double check this one. Right. Just because we've had a lot of concerns and fraudulent transactions through Dade County.
We love you, Miami. No hard feelings.
We still do a lot of business down there, but yeah, it is a little bit more of a high risk area for us. Absolutely.
Okay. All right, so how important is the industry on the type of lending? If you're in trucking versus restaurant versus oil and gas, you guys.
Oil and gas took a big hit for us the past couple of years, so lending has tightened up in that space. I mean, we still have channels for it, but it is tighter in that space. We're pretty open across the board. Medical marijuana we haven't got into. Okay. That's one area that everyone keeps asking about. We haven't breached that, but that is something that we keep talking about. But aside from that, we're pretty wide open across the space.
Okay, great. All right. Moving on, Darren. So if you want to do equipment financing and you're dead set against doing a personal guarantee. Now, for years we've been saying the criteria to do that is that you got to have 5 years in business, at least 5 employees, and $5 million in annual gross revenue. Does that still seem accurate? Is that a possibility at all?
It is, and it's actually really common. The couple of ones that we really need, the most important, is the 5 years time in business. We want to see several employees. Also, we like to see diverse ownership, not one owner.
Really?
Yeah,
That's different.
It's you have one owner. If something goes wrong with him, the business could go sideways. But the big component we look at a lot of times is go back into the business credit report, the payment report. Have they borrowed under the business directly without a personal guarantee before? If they have, yes, there's a good likelihood they can get approved without a personal guarantee. If they don't have any business credit, then yes, we would ask for tax returns to see how the financial strength is of the company.
Okay, so what we don't have listed here is some minimum number of trade lines. That's also one of the criteria you're looking at. They got to have at least some other type of financing?
Correct. Under the business, at least 3 trade lines, and we're looking for comparable credit. So let's say they want to borrow $100,000. We're going to pull their business credit report, and we're going to want to see if they borrowed something close to $100,000 before and paid it relatively timely. So if they've borrowed $85,000 in the past and they paid it for the past 2 years, that's a great trade for us to help them get to $100,000.
If somebody doesn't know what their business credit score is and they want to go check it, where do they go?
DMB is a great service to kind of check your overall credit. I believe a business owner can call PayNet and get a PayNet business report as well, and I think it's free, maybe once a year, to at least see what other lenders are seeing.
Okay.
I'm not positive on that. You'd have to double check, but that is something I would recommend people check. Just like your personal credit. You check your personal credit maybe once a year. It's good to know what your business credit looks like, so when business lenders look at it, you know what they're seeing.
Okay, so next I think we have another example here of a franchise startup gym. Did we do the tap out with you?
I believe we did, yeah.
Okay,
we did.
All right. So are you still doing gyms? I remember I felt like that one was a little bumpy to get through.
If I recall, there's a newer concept getting started, a newer franchise concept. So it's always a little bit challenging just to figure out the new concept and how it's going to work versus an established franchise concept. But no, we're doing gyms all the time. I have no issues with gyms. There's tons of equipment in gyms. Almost everything in there we can finance, from all your weights and your racks to the boxing gyms to the flooring mats. Again, all the sound system, all the lighting up top. I mean, anything that's really tangible in that business is essentially something that we could finance.
What's the success rate of gyms? Is it pretty good?
Actually, it's fairly well.
Is it?
It's much better than restaurants.
Awesome. Better than restaurants. Good.
And our collateral is a lot better, given that we can take the collateral and resell it and recoup a lot of our losses, which is a good thing.
Great. All right, so let's get into some of the documents. If you're sitting there thinking, I want to get some equipment finance, all right, here we have some summary. Let me know if this is all still accurate. If the owner is looking for $75K or less, then we need 4 months bank statements. We need the actual quotes on the equipment. Don't say I want to buy a truck. Say I want to buy this exact truck with a printout of what that is. And then a signed and dated application. Our application is really just a one page that gives us information on you and the business. Now you were saying they could do app only up to $250. So do you still agree with what that says there, or?
Correct. So we are going up to $250 for established businesses, someone that's got 5 years time in business. For a startup, the program's going to be a little different, but for an existing business, yes, we can go up to $250. Again, it goes back to big time in terms of that business borrowing $100 or $200 before. Something like that is going to help us get them approved for an app only $250. Okay. But yeah, the information you're requesting is still relevant and accurate.
Okay, great. And then if you want more than $75K, then we also ask for current year's profit and loss and balance statement or balance sheet, 3 years tax returns, or 3 years plus last year's P&L if you haven't filed yet, 6 months bank statements instead of 4, and then our full application, which includes a business debt worksheet, personal financial statement, and personal tax returns. Is there anything else that I'm missing from that? Or is that too much?
No.
Do you need 6 months bank statements?
You really don't. You need 3 months bank statements, 2 years tax returns minimum. When you start getting into the millions of dollars of transactions, $1 million request, then yes, you're going to look for at least 3 years financials. But for something under $500,000, it's pretty fair. You only need the 2 years taxes, 3 months bank statements. Depending on the business's strength, we may not need the owner's personal tax returns. It's always great to ask for them so we don't have to go back for them. But oftentimes we don't need them because we can approve the business without them.
Okay, awesome. All right, so we're going to go into the industries a little bit, and I made this nice slide that's too small to read. As far as I know, The equipment financing breaks up into 3 categories, and about half of it is sort of it's about $250K to $5 million. Small ticket would be, beneath that, and large ticket above that. Does that seem to be anywhere near? Yeah, yeah. Good luck reading that, right?
I can't read that. Thanks for reminding me. I need glasses. Thanks, Tim.
Yeah. Well. All right. Let's move on. That's fine. It's a range, and you said you're seeing your average deal is around 125. Yeah. And then we have a bunch of industries. Let's just skip over that. It's too small to read too. We do have some questions coming in, so let's see here. Joe is asking, can we do hotel remodeling?
We can. Great question. Hotels have a lot of equipment that we can include. Just thinking about a hotel that needs to remodel, we can include everything from their beds to all the. Think about when you're inside of a hotel room, the beds, the nightstands, the coffee pots, the TVs, the dressers, the blow dryers in the bathroom, even all of the door locks on the hotel door to get in. Also with hotels, a lot of times they have a big sign out front. That sign could be $50,000. We can include that. The automated doors that open into a hotel when you first walk in, we can include all those items as well. A lot of times they have a lot of data storage and software programs they need for hotel management. We can finance all those items. There's even small things like there's a wheelchair accessible unit that you can help somebody that's handicapped to get into the pool that was mandated several years back, and we can include those within our financing.
Okay.
So
what about
many
sheets
things
and towels and stuff like that?
That would fall into our soft cost category.
Okay.
But if the remodel is $500,000 and the sheets and towels are $50,000, yeah, it would fall within our category, and yes, we could include that.
So I've talked to some hotel people, by the way, and typically when I'm talking to them, they're asking for crazy rates, like 4%. What's the cheapest you're going to get on a hotel? Is that even possible?
As you've seen, rates have been going up. On an app-only deal, you're not going to see that low. App-only being minimal financial information, you're not going to see that low. You're probably going to see in the 7 to 10, 12% range is pretty typical for an app-only.
Okay.
For a customer with full financials, where we have all their documents and all their information, and we can better assess that business, you can maybe see in the 4s and 5s. But usually those transactions are going to be upwards of $500,000. You're not going to see that very often on a $50,000 or $100,000 transaction.
Okay, now if somebody's buying an existing hotel, is that a startup or an existing business for equipment leasing?
So kind of unique question, actually. And the way we underwrite that is oftentimes we'll give that hotel, we'll ask the hotel owner, the previous hotel owner, how long that hotel has been, whatever it is, say Holiday Inn. If it's been a Holiday Inn for 20 years and our new business owner's purchasing that business, we'll credit him with 10 years time in business, half the time in business of the previous owner. So that will get him into non-startup category pricing.
He only needs 2 years to qualify for full business,
Correct.
Right? Okay.
Correct. So we kind of grandfather him at the time in business because we have the track history of the previous hotel.
All right, so as long as the previous hotel has 4 years, then that pretty much qualifies him for existing business.
Correct.
Financing.
He'll at least qualify for 2.
All right, I think we have an example here. Again, I don't know if we did this with you. We've been seeing a lot of trucks recently. I actually recently tied up with a Volvo dealership, and we just did a deal. I don't remember any of the details from this example, so let's skip on this because I don't want to talk about something I don't know about. Darren? Awesome. All right, let's talk about the funding process a little bit. So the total timeline that we have for the funding process is listed here as anywhere from 5 to 15 business days. How realistic does that sound?
That's very accurate. Transactions under $500,000, that's very accurate. I don't like to tease people, but realistically, I have done transactions in 48 hours, even 24 hours.
That's it? Everything done in 2 days?
Yeah, I don't want to tease you with that, but realistically, if the customer sends stuff back as soon as we send stuff, it can happen very quickly. But yeah, I think that's a very realistic time frame. 5 to 15 days, even 5 to 10 days is pretty accurate.
Okay, so a total funding timeline of 5 to 15 days. It starts off with one of our loan officers at one of our member offices getting the application, quotes, and bank statements and submitting it to underwriting. And internally, we get back within half a day to a day. After that, then it goes to us issuing a pre-qualification. Darren, you leave me hanging again. Move on. All right, so once we get an offer back so basically what happens is one of the loan officers submits all the information, they get a pre-qual response back, and then you go back to the client and say, are you comfortable with these terms? If they are, then you go ahead and collect all the rest of the documentation and submit it directly to the loan officer who's going to be handling the work with the different lenders we work with. We work with a lot of different lenders. One of the things that I feel like I've seen is deals get caught up in documentation or STIPs, and it really changes based on the lender you're working with. What are some of the stipulations or extra documentation requests that you see can drag things out the most, that are maybe the hardest for people to provide?
You know, if it's two different types of categories, if you want to talk startup companies, a lot of times the delay comes with the location just not being ready. That person comes to you because they want to get approved before they take the next step of signing their property lease, getting contractor bids, getting equipment bids. And so everyone gets excited because he's approved and ready, but he's not ready for funding for oftentimes a month or 2 months.
Do you have to get an occupancy permit or something before you can get the equipment?
We want to make sure that he's signed that lease, he's committed to the lease, and he's ready for it. We don't want to release funds on something where he doesn't need equipment for 6 months because now he's starting payments and all that stuff.
Okay.
So we want to try to time it with his opening of the business. So a lot of times when he signs a lease, it may be 30 days before he gets all his contractor bids, equipment invoices, at which point is when we'd start actually funding. We don't want to fund 6 months before and put this guy in payments before the lease is actually signed for the property. An existing business owner, sometimes there's questions about previous tax liens or things of that nature, which can slow things down, although we have a pretty good software system to be able to tell if things are paid or not paid. Titling can be a little bit of a pain just because it's an extra step. You got to deal with the DMV, so just expect those transactions to be a little bit slower. But aside from that, I don't see too many other things that slow things down.
Okay, awesome. Now, one of the things that I see that gets in the way sometimes is some vendors want their money up front. Some are okay with getting partial payment. Sometimes the equipment has to be on location before it'll be financed. So how frequently does that become an issue? And what do you guys do most of the time? Do you finance it in advance before it's delivered? Or do you want it delivered first? Are you doing half and half?
Good question. A lot of lenders have challenges with this. I would pride us in saying that we don't have many challenges with this. We work through a lot of these challenges. The big concern lenders have is if it's a brand new startup vendor and they want 100% payment before equipment's delivered, now we're concerned that that vendor may not deliver equipment and that customer is going to be upset because he doesn't have equipment. So if it's a brand new vendor, we may say, hey, we'll give you half the money now and half the money when equipment gets there. But bigger vendors oftentimes don't ask for any money up front. They just want a purchase order. Once the equipment's installed, then we pay them and they're happy with that.
Okay.
So we always ask the vendor what type of payment arrangement they need, and we're usually very flexible with making that happen. I haven't seen too many transactions held up because of that concern.
Okay. And one of the things that I say when people talk to me about getting equipment finance is one of the things that's unique about it is to get an equipment deal done, there's 3 things that need to be underwritten. The vendor selling the equipment, the person borrowing the equipment, and the equipment itself, right? And each one can potentially do a hang-up. So if you got great equipment or great borrower, but a weird or brand new vendor, what are the things that you look for in a vendor in order to know that you could finance something from that vendor?
A vendor that has a website, that's a start. A vendor that shows that they've sold equipment before. Maybe they have a few years' time in business. We'll pull their business reports oftentimes as well to see if they have any tax liens or if they have any credit, just to see what type of history they have. Most vendors that are reputable have an online presence and have reviews and all sorts of other stuff. So things like that make it very easy for us to get a vendor approved.
But a private purchase, if you're buying a truck from your neighboring business, can you guys do that?
We can. It's an extra step we got to add into the mix. We do an on-site visit where we'll actually have a site inspector come out and exchange the title for the check, which is why it extends probably an extra day for those type of transactions. But yes, we can do private party sales, mostly only for title transactions, because that title allows us to put a perfected lien on the asset versus a restaurant equipment. It's so hard to put a lien on an asset when you don't know if it's already encumbered or in a lien already.
Okay.
So that's why I say private party transactions, you want to limit those to title transactions.
Okay.
Although we will do some bigger piece of equipment, some CNC, as long as we get clear proof of payment from the
CNC
owner.
Being... Not everybody knows.
Big machine tools.
Yellow iron, basically, right?
Well, yellow iron's different. Yellow iron's like bulldozers, tractors. CNC's like a lot of those machines that...
Big machine presses.
Yeah, correct.
Okay.
Correct.
If you don't know what it is, you don't need the financing.
You can Google CNC and you'll see lots of big pictures. We like that stuff.
All
Lots
right.
of big pictures.
Oh,
It's not. So an auction would be a vendor sale. And
the question was, what about auctions? If somebody wants to go buy trucks at an auction or something. All right, we'll go ahead and answer.
Yeah, so that would be a vendor sale. So that would be very easy for us to get.
So the auction house is the vendor that you would underwrite? in that sense?
A lot of times auction houses are big auction houses. You don't need to underwrite those type of transactions.
Okay.
But those are great customers that they know they're going to an auction in, let's say, a week, and they have an estimate that they want a bulldozer for 75 to 100,000. That's a great opportunity for us to get the customer approved with an approval letter that they can take to that auction house. So when they're ready to purchase that equipment and they say, yes, I want to bid on that, a lot of times the auction house is going to want to know that they have approval or financing in place. And when they bring that approval with them, it allows them to make that purchase much easier.
But how do you do it when you can't? Because I just said you got to underwrite three things: vendor, equipment, and borrower. In that situation, you could really only underwrite the borrower because you don't really know what the equipment is, generally what it is, and the vendor is an auction house, so you don't know where it's coming from. So is that difficult? Is that more complicated to get that pre-qual letter, or?
Not really, because oftentimes we have an idea what they're getting. So if they're getting a tractor or a bulldozer, they're going to know what range it is. A lot of the times they have online auctions beforehand where you can see what the equipment is, and that person knows that they're going to bid on these three pieces, so they have an idea about what it is.
Okay.
Our big piece is credit with the borrower, then the second piece is the asset, and then the vendor.
Do you have a lot of clients that go around to those car auctions and just buy cars to resell? How is that industry for this?
We don't, and it wouldn't be a good industry for us, being that with a lot of our lease transactions, it's not set up that they can buy and sell and buy and sell. Our transactions are set up more buy and hold.
Okay, that's interesting. All right, so we have some more questions. Brett is asking, I have a customer doing $1 million a year in 2017, looking to secure equipment targeting $3 million this year. They've rented equipment in the past. Can a rented contract help leverage a new equipment lease? Do you understand that question?
Yes.
Okay.
So it can. It wouldn't necessarily suffice for business credit, but to say oftentimes those rental companies will charge 3x our lease payment. So a lot of times those rental companies, if I finance a bulldozer with them, which we do, let's say my payment's $1,000, they take that payment, they 3x it, and they give it to the customer for $3,000. So a lot of times those are great customers for us because we know that the customer has already been paying $3,000 a month for this piece of equipment,
right?
Which if they finance it with me, it could be $1,000 a month. So it could help their cash flow substantially.
Excellent.
So,
Okay.
so yes, it would help, not necessarily to leverage it, but it would help us to get them approved for the request that they're looking for, knowing that they've already used that equipment, they're currently using it, and it's making them money.
Okay, great. All right, so we have another example, but why don't you just tell us about a recent funding that you did? Maybe one that's interesting for some reason. I don't know, I'm putting you on the spot. Ready? Are you ready for this?
Yeah.
What's it? Just tell us the last funding you did.
That was the last one I did. You put me on the spot here.
How many do you think you do in a month? Typical month? 5 or 10 a month?
10 to 20 on average.
10 to 20. Okay.
10 to 20 on average.
How many of those are coming from vendors where it's just the same thing over and over again? Is that a lot of it?
Probably around maybe 40% a lot of times. Okay, most recent transaction was an LED purchase. Business owner was through a vendor. Business owner was acquiring new LED lighting for their business, which lowers their operating cost, makes it more efficient to work with. That was the most recent transaction.
So it was inside a building. They were just redoing all lights with LED lights?
Yeah, a lot of times the cost savings of a business owner to install LED lights actually outweighs the actual cost of my lease. So it actually saves them money.
Wow.
Take, for example, if their energy cost is $5,000 a month, my lease payment could be $1,000 a month. It could drop their electricity cost $2,000 to $3,000 a month. So instantly they have a net savings by switching over to LED.
Wow, that's great. Awesome. All right, so we have some equipment terminology that we're going to knock through. We try to do these pretty quick because this can be pretty boring, right? So what's a conditional sale agreement?
Well, I mean, you have it up there in terms of standard. I mean, conditional sale is like a loan essentially, where the borrower there's usually no residual value, but it's most similar to an actual loan product, either an EFA, equipment finance agreement, or what's called a dollar buyout lease, where it's expected that the ownership transfers to the business owner at the end of term.
So conditional sale agreement is where you get a lease, and at the end you can buy it for $1, or you just own it automatically.
Correct.
You just own it automatically.
It's assumed that the business owner wants to acquire the equipment at the end of the term, versus the opposite is a fair market value lease, where it's more of a rental contract.
Then you got to buy it at the end at some amount. Okay.
Correct. You either buy it at the end or continue to rent it. But a conditional sale is assumed that the borrower is going to acquire that asset.
All right, now we've been talking about leases the whole time, so I'm going to skip the one of what is a lease. But my version of it is if you have a 3-year lease, then I think one of the things that I see people get surprised about the most is they get into a lease for 3 years or 5 years, and after a while they want to buy it out and be done. You have to pay, unless you negotiate in advance some sort of a prepaid discount, you got to pay off the whole lease even if you pay it in advance. I know we had, I don't know if you remember Project Walk, that one in San Francisco.
Yeah.
They were surprised after a few years that they still had money left because they wanted to be done. So that was one where they leased it over a few years and then they had a buyout at the end. Anyway, so it's important to understand how the lease works before you get in. And that's, again, probably the biggest thing people don't understand. If you get a 3-year lease and you want to buy it out at a year, you have to pay off the next 2 years of the lease, right?
Correct. Oftentimes the lender will give you a discount, but I tell everybody up front that don't get into a 3-year lease and expect to pay it off in month 3 or 4 or 5 and save money. That's not how a lease product works. If you do want to pay it off, you will save some money, but it's not a substantial amount of money. And especially for startup companies, they always ask me this, and I urge them to not pay it off for at least 1 year. Big reason for that is at least to establish the business credit so that they can finance in the future for a lower cost of borrowing.
And another thing, and I don't want to get too complicated, but typically the lease coincides with the rate that you can depreciate the asset. So even if you paid it all off in 1 year, you couldn't write it all off as an expense on your taxes. So, right, in some ways it's better to lease it out because that goes along with depreciation, right?
Correct. There is Section 179 that allows you to depreciate more, but that really goes back to their accounting department, or their accountant, and how they want to handle the asset. But yeah, oftentimes the reason you lease it is for the cash flow of the business, to help cash flow the business properly and depreciate over the life of the asset, which could be 3 years.
All right, so you got the leasee and the lessor, and the leasee is the person getting the lease, lessor is the person, would be you guys issuing the lease, right?
Correct.
All right, so what's fair market value lease? We kind of touched on it, but specifically, so what happens? Somebody is getting along and you say, all right, do you want a fair market value lease? Do you want a conditional sale agreement? Do you pretty much know what it is by the equipment type, or is that a question that you ask everybody?
Oftentimes the collateral will play an effect into doing a conditional sale or an equipment finance agreement. If the end of term value is very minimal, say lighting or software, a lot of times it'll be an equipment finance agreement. A fair market value lease has a lot more benefits. Large, more Fortune 500 companies utilize this predominantly because of the tax treatment. It's more favorable for tax treatment. It also produces a lower monthly payment for the borrower. Take, for example, just hypothetically, a lease for $100,000, hypothetically here. On a dollar buyout lease, your payment could be $2,000 a month, versus a fair market value lease, it could be $1,200 a month.
Okay.
So you're saving,
big difference.
That's extra cash flow for the business, and put a residual at the end of term, so that business owner, at the end of the term, let's say it's a 5-year term, has the ability to either purchase that asset for its fair market value at the time. They could return the asset to us, and then we would resell it, and there's no cost to them. Or they can continue renting the asset for as long as they'd like.
All right, so an example would be you buy a truck worth $100,000, it's a 4-year lease. If you do the fair market value lease, at the end of 4 years, say the truck's still worth $40,000, you got to pay $40,000 to keep the truck. Or for a conditional sale agreement, they've just paid it off in 4 years, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
All right, what's a put?
Put option it goes along the lines with a fair market value. A lot of times the lender and the borrower negotiate a end of term guaranteed purchase option so that there's no uncertainty about how much that fair market value is. If the customer is concerned the fair market value could be 20, 30, 40%, we could put a document in the agreement that says the guaranteed purchase option is 5% at the end of term. This way at the end of term they know exactly how much it is.
Oh, that's interesting, because otherwise you don't know. It might be worth a lot, it might be worth a little. This
Correct.
way it's defined in advance.
Correct.
All right, that's interesting. All right, so we've gone through all the terminology. Just a real quick as a summary, if you're an agent with us and you want to start bringing in more equipment deals, great. Then you just want to go out and market the program, create the lead in any way we can. You want to target really existing businesses. I know we talked about startups a lot, but I will say from my experience, existing business, it's a lot easier than startups. There's a lot more hurdles and hoops. I mean, do you have to have business experience for a startup, like a relevant business experience? Is that
Not necessarily, but it is very helpful. It's
Okay.
not necessarily, but very helpful.
All right. So if you're an agent, there's 4 ways to create a lead. You probably already know this. Either log in and manually enter in the portal, or use your marketing link that'll be right on your dashboard. You can send that out. You can email in a lead to lead@24houropprovals.com, or if you have a completed equipment finance application, send it to eqf@24houropprovals.com, and that goes direct to an underwriter. Or of course, you can just call up your partnership manager or your agent and their name is listed right on the top of your dashboard. And I think that's really it. After that, the deal comes in to one of our loan officers who's going to consult with the client, help them understand what their best options are. I can tell you very frequently we have someone coming in, they say they want $100,000 in working capital, and we're able to break out, say, $40,000 in equipment finance. Maybe we can still get them $100,000. Now they have extra money they can use to run their business. All right, so again, thank you everybody for coming on. Subscribe to the show if you're new. Thank you, Phil, for doing this.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
And see you all next week for the Unsecured Finance and Personal Loan Program. Cheers.
Cheers.